First of all, hi. It's so good to see you all. For those that haven't met me yet, and I haven't met you, my name is Angie Von Slaughter. So today we are continuing our Summer on the Mount series. And last week, I watched it later, but Aaron did a fantastic job at covering who is Jesus. And it's so fascinating because if you have any kind of background of Christianity, who is Jesus? Jesus is usually just one typical box. And it's interesting to know that Jesus actually might have a different view depending on the lens you're looking through. So that was really fascinating. I thought it was wonderful. And don't mind if we have some ringing in the ear with the microphone technology. It's great and terrible all at the same time. Joe is doing an awesome job, as he always does, so thank you for that, Joe. So the scriptures start in Matthew, blessed, blessed. It's an adjective or a state of being derived from the Greek word makarios. And I want to know, first of all, before I go any further, I do this a lot when I speak. I like to talk about the root words of things, and not because it's hip or trendy or cool, but because it's really interesting to know how we interpret things in a modern English context compared to what it meant at the time. That's the whole reason, is so that we can actually get a further understanding of, wait, what did that word actually mean? And so this word that was birthed in the ancient times of ancient Greece, this word blessed, referred actually to the Greek gods. That's how this word came about. The gods were the blessed ones. The gods were free from the troubles of humankind, from poverty, from pain, sickness, weakness, and even death. And if you're like me, I was a total Greek mythology nerd in high school, and I thought it was fascinating. It was intriguing, these beings that were either real or not real, depending on who you are, that they made up and idolized. Why? Because they were free from humanity, from the brokenness of this world. And so the Greek referred to the dead as blessed, which is interesting because they too were obviously free from affliction, right? Hard to suffer when you're, The Greeks soon began to adapt the word to refer to members of a certain social class, which is interesting. The elite, the wealthy, the upper crust of society, because they too were free from most of the worrisome troubles of the world. They were fortunate. And then we find the word splashing under the pages of the Old Testament, right? We see that it's there, and it's often taken as another meaning, referring to righteous living. If you lived right, you were blessed. And in all of these definitions, the word blessed really meant you had to live at a higher plane, right? You had to be higher than everyone else. You were a god. You were wealthy. You were righteous. You were better. Blessed meant better. So when we hear this backstory, it's really no surprise at all that the word blessed is translated to fortunate. After all, makarios, blessed, really does mean fortunate. Endowed with the favor and the protection of the divine, the favored and the fortunate. And yet when we read the words here in Matthew, as Matthew just read, I'm full of bad jokes, as he penned in chapter 5, quoting Jesus' famous Sermon on the Mount, he starts with the word blessed. And we get the sense that this word is used in a whole new way, a whole new perspective with new meaning. And so let's back up the story a little bit. At the end of Matthew chapter 4, we're given a glimpse of Jesus' ministry a little bit. We see that he's been traveling through Galilee and teaching and healing all kinds of people. And he's beginning to garner quite a bit of fame and reputation, as one would for casting out demons and healing people. I'm fairly certain if that happened today that you would probably be a little bit famous. And so he's getting a little bit of a following, if you will. People are like, who is this Jesus? What's going on? And so chapter 4, verse 25, we read, large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and across the Jordan followed him. Now, something to note here, which is fascinating, Matthew mentions a few places, right? So we see, starting with Galilee and Jerusalem, which were extremely Jewish areas. I'm convinced that whoever wore this before me had a really big ear, because it won't stay on properly. Aaron, if that was you, I'm sorry, but your ears are bigger than mine. So we'll just laugh it off, because that's what I do. But so anyway, he mentions Galilee and Jerusalem, right? So they're extremely Jewish areas. And then he inserts Decapolis right in between the two ever so casually, which honestly, if you're reading it, it's kind of like, yeah, that's no big deal. Another city, another city, another city. That's nice. Jesus went to all these different cities. Cool. But honestly, this isn't casual. This is actually a really important detail that we shouldn't miss. Because Decapolis meant 10 cities, because it was comprised of 10 Greco-Roman cities on the eastern frontier of the Roman Empire. So Decapolis was anything but Jewish. They were Greek. They were from the Roman Empire. And so that meant they weren't religious. They were probably predominantly pagan from what we've studied. And in the Jewish narrative, they were thought of as impure, unclean, unholy, because they did not follow Jewish law. So now it gives us a different story, right? We have large crowds of people comprised of the holy and of the unholy, of the pure and the impure, the religious and the pagan, and truthfully, probably everybody in between. Right? Probably all kinds of people from all walks of life. And so the crowds then begin to follow Jesus. And we read in chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. So this is also interesting because unlike the scribes and Pharisees who taught in grand auditoriums and synagogues, Jesus chose to deliver his message, the Sermon on the Mount, on an unknown mountain, out in the wilderness. It wasn't a holy mountain like Mount Sinai or Mount Zion or the Mount of Olives. Instead, it was unnamed and ordinary. And it was also, mind you, outside of Jerusalem, with no distinguishing holiness. It had of no importance. And you'll find that this actually rings true of Jesus' ministry, often, where he uses the ordinary. He uses the plain old ordinary, speaking to the unlovable ragamuffin types of people. Here, Jesus, he chooses to speak to a diverse audience in an ordinary, and yet it's honestly a profound way. He starts his revolutionary, as we now call it, Sermon on the Mount speech with a list of blessings or proverb-like passages that are better known today to us as the Beatitudes. And really, they're cryptic and full of meaning, and they've been translated quite a few different ways. Honestly, I've heard the Beatitudes since I was a child, so it's been interesting to study it again with a different lens. And each one, I should note, really includes a topic that forms a major biblical theme. And it's far too long to comprise into one, honestly, small sermon this morning. So if you're interested, I encourage you to maybe read and study on your own if that fascinates you. And the phrases really echo an Old Testament context because a lot of what Jesus says in the Beatitudes, really can be found in other books of the Bible. But here in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus gives them new meaning, which is interesting. He presents a new set of ideals that focus on love and humility. They echo the highest ideals of his teaching on spirituality and compassion. And he starts with the very first statement, an announcement, if you will, or a proclamation, which instantly flips the word blessed on its head. And it's so fascinating to me because I imagine, he sits. That's what he does as a teacher. I'm sitting today because I'm tired. But he sits. He chooses to sit and just speak intimately. He doesn't cower over someone or demand. It's just a very intimate teaching. And he starts by saying these words, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." The poor in spirit. I've often heard this described as blessed are the humble. And a lot of times I've heard this, blessed are the humble. Or literally, blessed are the poor. And yet the Greek word here for poor, which again, I think we should note, tokos, which is a confusing spelling, by the way. Those Greeks, gotta love them, but it's tokos, which translated to a person who is reduced to begging. They were destitute, lowly, powerless, and without spiritual virtues. The tokos, honestly, which is an interesting insight, was often someone who had lost their family and their social ties, and they were destitute, without any resources. And they were left to a lifestyle of wandering and begging. Okay, this changes this scripture a little bit, doesn't it? I don't think we're describing humble here. Straight out of the gate, Jesus begins to describe someone who is spiritually homeless and morally bankrupt, a spiritual beggar looking for the remnants of anything to fill their soul. Jesus seems to echo the words spoken in Isaiah 66:2. "These are the ones I look on with favor, those who are poor and contrite in spirit." Yeah, the contrite. That word also means guilty. Let that sink in. Blessed are those who are spiritually empty and morally bankrupt, the spiritual beggars and the wanderers, the guilty, remorseful and full of shame. Blessed are the sinners. The favor of God is yours. This flies in the face of religious teachings and was disruptive to the religious leaders at the time, if you could imagine. And quite honestly, if I can be so honest, it still is pretty disruptive to this time. Very disruptive. Oftentimes we read the scriptures and view the Beatitudes as a certain set of guides for righteous living, similar to the book of Proverbs that we've studied before, as a set of conditions and a results and equations resulting in heavenly probabilities. If I live this way, this will happen. If I choose this life, then I will be blessed. If I live in an elevated way, you too will receive God's blessings. And we interpret this in ways in which we can earn the kingdom of heaven, as if, first of all, it can be earned. It was freely given. And ways in which we can earn also the favor of God. We dangerously, I think, place our humanness and our human behavior above God's infinite love and grace. And so the holy and the unholy, the rich, the poor, the Jew, the Gentile, they all gather around to hear him say, "You, the spiritually sick and the homeless, you, the one who just can't seem to get it together, you, the one who is full of guilt and begging for anything to fill your soul, you are blessed." He does something revolutionary, and he declares that the favor and the fortune of God is for all. Not just the rich or the dead or the gods or the righteous, but literally all. That is the gospel, in my opinion. That is good news, that the favor of God is for every living human on this planet. So then we continue to read, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Have you ever mourned? Have you ever experienced a broken heart? Has your spirit ever just been torn in two? Or if you haven't been affected so much by the sting of grief, Have you sat there and stood by and watched someone helplessly while you see them agonizing in gut-wrenching depths of grief? You feel helpless. And it's like it's swallowed them whole. And if you've ever experienced it, it's engulfing. But then it says, they will be comforted. That phrase is a call to action. Comforted, they will be comforted, meant to encourage or to plead on the behalf of someone else, to pray for someone, to sit with someone. Blessed are those who can't seem to find a way out of their dire circumstances. Blessed are those who feel sorrow, sadness, lonely, who they feel agony and they feel pain. Blessed are those who grieve, who mourn, for they will find comfort by the encouragement and prayers of others. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. We see the scripture echoes the teachings in Psalms 37:11. But the meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity. So inheriting the land or earth was a phrase used during this time. We tend to read that sentence as a literal, they're going to inherit the planet. Which, how does one inherit the planet? Is there a will for that? Some sort of, how do you get that? And we read it that way, but you have to understand that people at this time, they didn't know there was a planet. So let's start there. They didn't know there was the US. They didn't know there was Europe. They didn't know about continents, let alone the earth. So they had no concept of this vast galaxy that we now call home. So their view of Earth was literally the ground, the ground in their feet, their neighborhood, their community. That is their land. Their land is what they know, where they walk, where they go. That is their land. So when we try to understand the importance of inheriting a specific land, I really think it's important that we ought to know who owned the land. You think? Then you know who you're getting it from, how it's coming about, why is this such a big deal? And the Roman Empire was a militant superpower. They had conquered and ruled, suppressed land from what we now know as England, all the way to India. The emperor at the time was known as Kyrios, the Lord of the earth, because he ruled. The one who claimed the allegiance and loyalty of subjects throughout his wide empire. A lot of modern churches, if you've ever seen this, matter of fact, my old church used to have this. They have a banner or a sign that said, Jesus is Lord. It's not an uncommon practice at all to proclaim Jesus is Lord. But that wasn't always the case. There was a different narrative that was told and went something like this. Caesar is Lord. And I remember the first time hearing this, I went, wait, what? You mean Jesus is Lord was not the first time that phrase has ever been used? No, not at all, actually. It was used often with rulers, that Caesar was Lord. Caesar is Kyrios. Caesar rules and reigns. Caesar and the Roman Empire had a certain way of doing things. I would like to say it was a way that involved violence, force, and control. So who inherits the earth then? Well, the narrative is pretty clear at this time and shouting pretty loudly, the Romans inherit the earth. The powerful inherit the earth. The violent inherit the earth. The forceful inherit the earth. And then Jesus disrupts this way of living and saying, and he's like, no. Actually, the meek inherit the earth. The peaceful, the quiet, the gentle-hearted. Wait, so you mean not the obscenely wealthy, not the famous, not the powerful, not those with the biggest missiles and those with the biggest bombs? They don't inherit the earth? What about the powerful 1%? They don't inherit the earth? Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. And here we can actually see that hunger meant to crave, thirst meant to eagerly long for, and righteousness, as I loved that Matt read the interpretation where normally righteousness is, his version said justice. And I went, yes, bingo, that is exactly it. Blessed are those who crave and eagerly long for integrity and justice. Blessed are those who seek justice in the world, those who fight against inequality. Those who look at our world and their heart is split wide open in agony because they want to help the less fortunate, because they see that things aren't quite working the way it should. Those who long to do the right thing, not only by others, but by God. You are blessed. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Mercy, as I've read, wasn't commonly shown during this time because, as I mentioned, we live in a world where there's a vicious and violent Roman Empire. I don't know that mercy was much in their dialogue. So grace was a concept foreign to this empire. But here Jesus offers, again, another way. Blessed are the compassionate ones, the ones who choose the way of love and grace instead of hate and violence. And then he goes on, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. These words really focus on our internal and on our intentions. Aside from God, our hearts are one of the things talked about more than anything in Scripture. Depending on your translation of the Bible, give or take, the word is mentioned almost over 800 times. So it's kind of a big deal, I'd say, right? It's important because the heart is thought of as the center of all physical and spiritual life. It's where everything resides. If you think about it, it's where your blood pumps. It's where you feel. It's behind all motives. It's where our passions, desires, sense of purpose, and character reside. A pure heart involves having pure desires, having a sense of purpose, having right motives. And honestly, let's not confuse a pure heart with perfection. Because in my opinion, and again, this is just my opinion, Christianity has this obscene lust and love affair, an obsession with perfectionism. It's an obsession. I don't understand how we have realized that Christ hung on a cross to finish everything, and then we go, I'm going to pick it back up, and I'm going to keep carrying this burden and do it on my own. But no, a pure heart isn't about perfectionism. It's about one that's without hidden motives and a desire to follow the heart of God. And if we read that with the lens of Psalms 51 in mind, create in me a pure heart, O God, then we have the idea that it's not even through us that heart is made pure, that it's through God. It's not in our own strength and doing, that it's in God that we are made pure. So blessed are the ones who seek and desire God. Blessed are the ones whose motives are true. Blessed are those who have a sense of purpose and lean not on their own strength and understanding. And then blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Now, hopefully you're all tracking with me because this is a lot of, I feel like I said, each one is a theme. And each one is packed full of content. Packed full of content. But if you haven't noticed by now, and I'll spell it out for you, there's a progression to this story, right? You can't be a peacemaker unless you have a pure heart with right motives. And you can't have right motives unless you've really been shown mercy and grace and knows what that's like to extend that to others. And mercy is found on the other side of the coin along with justice. And justice and mercy is shown for the meek, the mourning, the spiritually homeless, the bedraggled ragamuffins. right? It's all encompassing. Peacemakers are the mediators who bring about reconciliation. They are nonviolent, harmony-seeking pacifists, quite honestly, who offer a third way of thinking. Blessed are the ones who fight for reconciliation by way of nonviolence. Blessed are those who give a voice to those who don't have one. I know a lot in this room that have felt like you don't have a voice. You have felt marginalized. You have felt put down, left out, shut out, forgotten. Blessed are those who give those people a voice. Blessed are those who choose to hear both sides of the story and honestly love just the same. Blessed are those that choose to say all and not us and them. For they will be called the children of God, the dependents whom God loves and protects. And then we finally read this section that says, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you. Has anyone ever been there? Can I get an amen? Because of me, rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Jesus knows what he's talking about when he mentions persecution. He had to honestly, as I've mentioned before, he disrupted a land that was full of religious law and political power and proposed a different way of living. And I'm just going to say this was not well received. We obviously know the rest of the story. He was bold enough to speak against the ways of the Roman Empire. And it's as if this proclamation was a foreshadowing of what was to come. It's as if when he talked about persecution, he knew what the cost would be. See, crucifixion was widely used during Roman reign, and we tend to go, well, Jesus is the only one. Jesus is one of many. It was a common practice, and it really was a political statement, shouting loud, this is what happens to you when you go against the grain. This is what happens to you when you don't surrender. I have a feeling that Jesus knew the cost of what it meant. And that when you announced Jesus is Lord, what you really meant was Caesar is not. That when you announced Jesus is Lord, you meant all. Caesar was a symbol of the oppressive power, and Jesus, the representation of liberation and freedom. But when you renounce things like the Roman Empire, superpower, they just might want you dead. That's what happens. And friends, on a very real level, right, we don't live in a Roman Empire, but then I almost want to say, but do we? When you choose to tell a counter narrative and stand up for those that are marginalized, hurt, oppressed, harmed, it won't be well received. Let me say this as someone who has been on both sides of the coin. I've been marginalized, and I've been the person standing up for the marginalized. It's not well received. When you make a stand to improve our political systems, our health care, when you expose the corrupt in the top 1%, when you stand against racism, inequality, and you support the downtrodden, the broken, the meek, the poor, the bedraggled, you too might be persecuted. And it might not be in the literal sense as we read in these scriptures, but you get what I'm saying, that there's a cost. There's a cost here. And so lastly, to conclude his proclamations and blessings, Jesus gives an invitation, really, of sorts. He tells his disciples that they are the salt of the earth and the light of the world, and then beckons them to shine their light so that all may see it. Now, it's interesting that he chooses the phrase salt of the earth. Salt is potent, it's effective. Salt preserves. It was still, even to this day, used as a preservative. It protects, and it enhances. Think of the last time you cooked a meal and you did not put salt in it. Matter of fact, my wife and I just made a pozole the other day that ended up amazing, but at first it was like, it's kind of blah. And we're like, what does it need? Well, we put lime and a whole bunch of other things, and then it was like salt. And I think we both said that afterwards, like, salt! It needed salt. This is amazing now. And then we had it leftovers for days. It was great. It was awesome. But to leave that out just left the thing, which was a good thing. It left it feeling kind of blah. And a steak without salt would just be meh, right? And who am I to say because I'm a vegetarian, but that's what they say. You gotta add some salt. But you get the idea that we are supposed to enhance, to bring flavor, to preserve this world and those around us, which honestly means leaving things better than the way we found it. Not hurting it, not judging it, not persecuting it, but leaving it better than the way we found it. I'll even go so far as to say to preserve the earth, which is something we ought to do, to care for this planet, to protect others. But the thing about salt is a little goes a really long way, right? So maybe not over-salt things a bit. I think the church, by and large, has been guilty of over-seasoning with salt. So it's left others feeling a little bit dehydrated and feeling thirsty for something real and authentic. It's like, oh, it's a little too much. So it's like in moderation. And that's where your light comes in. Something true and pure and cannot be hidden. We often think of lights in modern context of electricity. Obviously, they didn't have electricity. And so in biblical times, light would have been from the sun or illuminated by a lamp. And if you think about that, the light is just enough to permeate the areas around it. We're not talking headlights, a spotlight. It's gentle, it's soft. This light represents truth, knowledge, and the power of understanding. There's a saying that goes, once you see, you can't unsee. Once you know, you can't unknow. And friends, once we've seen another way of living and we've heard the cries of liberation and freedom and justice, we can't unsee. We can't go back. And to follow Christ really is hard, but not in the way that I was taught growing up. I was taught it was hard because you can't say words like shit, which I just said in church. Oh, yeah. Because of that. That's why it was hard. I can't swear. I can't do this. I have to watch what I do. And oh my gosh, this is challenging. No, the reason why Jesus' message was so revolutionary is because it required action. It required action. It meant this world that you live in, you ought to help it and love it. What would our world look like if we all embraced our blessedness and in return blessed others? And so when we read the Beatitudes and we're tempted to redefine blessed as living in a higher plane than anyone else, being a god, being wealthy, being righteous, or better than others, remember that God's grace meets us exactly where we are. It meets them exactly as they are. So, blessed are you, the unworthy, the wretched, the spiritually bankrupt and guilty. Blessed are you who feel like misfits in this narrative we called life, and sometimes you just don't feel like you quite belong. Blessed are you in this place who work towards justice and choose mercy, love, and peace. Blessed are you who comfort, pray for, and love one another. Blessed are you. Every single one of you in this room. And I mean that. Blessed are you. Everyone in this room, anyone that might be watching online, you are loved. You are blessed. And I can't help but get a little choked up. It's something that I do because I'm an emotional person. But what would this world look like if we truly grasped what being blessed meant? It didn't mean we had to fight for something or prove something or earn something or be a god or be righteous or be pure. That we are as we are because God made us as we are. What would this world look like if Christians were the ones that were not judgmental, but the first ones people think of when they need to call someone for love, help, and hope, to be a beacon of light? What would that world look like? And I believe this is what Jesus is asking us and telling us in these scriptures. He's leveling the playing field. He's saying, these ways, I get it. I know that's how the world works, but this isn't how it ought to be. So every single one of you in this room, you are blessed. You are loved. You are the fortunate and favored ones. The favor of God is yours.